Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to review a magazine. And today's magazine is Teen Favorites from January 1978. This looks to be the 11th edition of this title. I do have one that is the 16th edition. And it's interesting the change in tone and also the subject matter and how they approach the subject matter compared to this. This is very promotional. This is something that was designed to appeal to the teenish market. This magazine probably would have slightly appealed to me, I should say, as a then new 11-year-old. Some of the stuff I would have skipped, and it's also probably had some appeal to older readers too, who had a teen mindset. Take a look at the cover. At this point, Elvis had just passed away over the summer of '77, so there's still some tributes to him. And Elvis did have some appeal to younger readers. I mean, his last hit was in 1972. So he wouldn't have been that relevant because, obviously teenagers, their interests change. They're very fickle. But nevertheless, Elvis still had a lot of appeal in the broad public. We see Farrah here. Farrah Fawcett was huge in 1977. And her leaving like Charlie's Angels was big news. The poster was big news. And they're asking what's next for her. Then we're told that there's going to be a new star on Happy Days, and that is Scott Baio, who played Chachi. And again, this magazine appealed mostly to teenage girls. We see there's an exclusive interview with Leif Garrett. Leif had his biggest hit in 1978 with I Was Made for Dancing. He also had a TV special. He was a teen idol in the making for a while. And we see that Tony Orlando is making a shocking decision. I don't know really if Tony Orlando was on many teens' radars at that point. I was a huge watcher of his variety show, Tony Orlando and Dawn, which I think ran from like 74 to about 76, 77. And I loved it as a kid, but it doesn't age well. None of those variety shows do. Tony Orlando, listening to him sing, he can just suck the soul out of any song. He had a lot of popular songs. Many of them are still well known. But nevertheless, Tony Orlando he was so bland. Then we see there's an insert for Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton had that magical year in 1976, was never able to replicate it again. Although going into 78, he was going to star in a big budgeted musical, Sergeant Pepper and the Lonely Hearts Club Band, or his Lonely Hearts Club Band. That is an amazingly terrible movie. Although I could watch it continuously because as bad as it is extremely watchable. And there are performances there that are worthy of watching, along with some really bad acting that is worthy of watching. And so we got the Elvis tribute. So I'm going to go into the comment. Oh, we're also told about John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, how they swing together in Grease. I don't think Grease had come out yet at this point, but they had the publicity shots and they had the build up for the film. There was a huge build up for the film. The film was a phenomenon. I got caught up in it because for some reason the 1950s were in vogue in the 1970s. And some of that was kind of understandable. It was sort of like a time that was seen as, quote, cleaner and more innocent. based on the popularity of the show Happy Days. Of course, it begs the question, who found the 1950s happy days? Happy for who? Because it wasn't for there were large parts of the demographic where 1950s should not have been a good time for them. And it would not have been. So I'm going to go into that. They do talk about the 1950s craze. So I'm going to take a look. We open up. We're treated to a pinup of Henry Winkler here, not the Fonz, Henry Winkler, because you can see the feathered hair here. Again, the Fonz was huge television character, particularly 1976. I think the height of Happy Days to me was during the Pinky Tuscadero and the Machachi brothers. That was the height. I had saw that episode a couple of years ago, and it's just absolutely dreadful. But nevertheless, I did not feel that way when I first seen it. And there's a lot of fan service for Henry here, and deservingly so, because he was making big moves, and some of those moves didn't really work out. So anyway, take a look at the table of contents. I'll go through the articles individually. Turn the page. Okay, one is the mailbox, and this is basically readers' questions. They printed a few of them. There's one on Andy Gibb. Just basically, this is like fan service stuff. So there's some questions about Andy Gibb. Andy Gibb, he rode off the success of his brothers. He had great songs of his own, particularly that first record. He was never able to replicate that success. He had a sad ending, though. He passed away very young. He seemed a little troubled, but nevertheless, at this point, he was like, you thought maybe he was going to be the big BG. But we see that he was born in 1958 in England. He moved to Australia when his family moved there. Duh, he was a baby. And he's battling it out with groups like Sweet and the Bay City Rollers. That was the demographic he was going for. There's a question about Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow had a lot of hits, but I don't think he was a teen favorite. There's not much on him. He was just born in Brooklyn, and he's a Gemini. So Barry kind of wanted to keep his private life quiet. Next question is on ABBA. Some questions about what they're doing, and they're working on a film at this point about their Australian tour. They were huge worldwide. Next question is on Alice Cooper. And the reader is asking that, Alice Cooper was known for those hard rock music, but he's shifting to a more kind of softer, popish tone. And the magazine's saying that, Alice is still going to play hard rock. He's still going to have very theatrical concerts. But at the same time, he's going to sing more kind of popish tunes. Alice appeared in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He says he has no memory of doing it because he was so zonked on drugs at that point. And his segment was kind of interesting. And next question is about Anson Williams, he played Potsy on Happy Days. He was actually the co-star originally of the show. And then eventually he got pushed to the side because of the popularity of the Fonz. And basically some questions about, who he is, what he does. And this is sort of the tone of the magazine, saying Anson's kind of a nice guy. He writes his own songs. He writes poetry. He likes to play with puppies and stuff like that. And this is the thing. There was a lot of teenage girls who, bought this magazine. That was the target demographic. So they're sort of presenting Anson Williams as this very safe date. And you're like you figure 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl. They have a crush on an older guy. In most cases, those older guys, they have some dirty thoughts in their heads, but those girls don't want to think about that. They're thinking, hey, if they're dating Anson Williams, he's going to be like holding their hand. He's going to kind of talk and kind of just be that shoulder to cry on when things get rough, and they don't want to present him as anything other than a safe, innocent date. The next is about Stevie Nicks and what she's doing, and again they're just saying Stevie kind of broke up with Lindsey Buckingham. They were married for a while, I believe. And she kind of is kind of like enjoying her career, and she's kind of like on and off dating. Okay, so I'm going to turn the page. So the next article is what's the buzz on TV, and leading off is Henry Winkler. They're actually talking about the infamous episode of where the Fonz jumps the shark, and the episode hadn't aired yet, I don't think, but they're talking about how he had done his own stunts. One of the things they wanted to emphasize about Henry Winkler was that he's a really capable guy. He's a guy who can do his own stunts. He's multi-talented. And along with just being this one great character, he can do a lot of things. And that is true. I found Henry Winkler can really dance. And I remember him doing a Shakespeare special, trying to make Shakespeare relatable to younger audiences. And that was like a fun TV special. They're talking about Jacqueline Smith and her romantic goings-on. I was never into Jacqueline Smith, even though she kind of fit my demographic. I had a huge crush on Farrah, though, and I had a crush on Kate Jackson, but that was when she was on The Rookies. Not so much when she was on Charlie's Angels. They're talking about Erin Moran here. She's looking to do different things. They're talking about Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds was riding high at this point. He had done Hooper. Hooper was a really successful movie. This is before he did those string of flops. He had done a movie called The End. The End was a film I remember enjoying when I first saw it as a kid. I did not care for it when I recently saw it. It kind of doesn't age well. But yeah, Burt was he was at the peak of his game. He was one of the few actors that went head-to-head with Star Wars and was successful. Because Smokey and the Bandit was, I think, the second largest grossing film of that year. Talking about Elton John here. He's doing stuff on The Muppet Show. They're also talking about Parker Stevens and Pamela Sue Martin. They were on the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys mystery. That was like an alternative, alternating, I should say, anthology. You'd have Nancy Drew one week, then Hardy Boys the other, then you would go back, rotate back and forth. And apparently they were filming an episode together, because normally the two productions were separate. So actually Parker didn't really meet Pamela Sue Martin until actually when they started working on that episode. Parker was kind of in the closet at the time. He was outed in the 80s, I remember, because there was a columnist, I think it was Michael Musto, and he had mentioned about a Hardy boy being married to a cherry lady, and that was Kirstie Allen, who was on Cheers at the time. So that's how they got outed. But nevertheless, they're mentioning that these two normally don't work together, but they have common interest, and that's in the environment. Parker likes Jacques Cousteau, and he works with the Jacques Cousteau Society. Jacques Cousteau was a famous sea environmentalist and explorer. And Pamela likes Greenpeace, which emphasizes, saving the whales. So this is sort of, they're tying in the two celebrities with causes. Jacqueline Smith is getting mentioned again. I'm not sure why. Oh, yeah. She had done her own stunts, but she had sprained her wrist. So again, kind of relatability. Acting is work. And sometimes they get hurt. Talking about Paul Michael Glaser. He also got hurt doing his own stunt. Involving the car. The car that looked so cool, but could probably go maybe 40 miles an hour because it was such a heavy tank. The actors both talked about the fact that if the car got up a small hill, they would cheer in celebration. Aaron Moran's mentioned again. And this is talking about other singing stars. They got their footprints in the Chinese theater in Hollywood. I was there. And David Lander, just kind of like some fan service about what he likes doing. And turn the page. The buzz continues. They're talking about Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall. Laverne and Shirley was the big show that year. 76, 77 was the number one show. I actually like that show more than Happy Days. They're talking about the rumors about the two fighting, which were 100% true. These two fought like crazy. But this issue is trying to emphasize that that's not the case, that things are going along very well with Laverne and Shirley. The following issue that I have of this comic says the opposite. So at this time, they were kind of going through damage control. Because Laverne and Shirley was a good thing, and they didn't want to, kind of blow it. They're talking about Sean Cassidy. Sean Cassidy was huge in 77. He had that one album. He had a couple good songs, I thought. They were remakes, but nevertheless, he was a pleasant guy. He was really good looking. And they're tying him into Marie Osmond, who's going out on her own. And, she's breaking away from Donnie. Donnie was too much of a rebel for her. And John Denver saying that he wants to get into movies. Believe it or not, John Denver was considered for the role of an officer and a gentleman before Richard Gere. And they're going back to Lenny and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley, saying that these two guys might get their own show because they were part of the reason why Laverne and Shirley was so funny. And then we see an ad for some posters here. So I'm going to go into the next page. Okay, this is an article about Laverne and Shirley and addressing the issue of the fighting that was going on set. It says that they get along really great. A lot of this stuff is very promotional. It's like if you were a fan of the show, this article is telling you why you are a fan of this show, or why you should be a fan of this show. It is popular with both teens and older viewers because teens kind of like enjoy the humor and they enjoy the interactions with the actresses, the way the actresses would interact with each other. And it was also popular with older viewers who had nostalgic feelings about the 1950s. And at the same time, kids like me would watch this show, never experiencing the 1950s and not realizing how much it sucked until decades later, and having these kind of like positive feelings toward the era. And turn the page. The article continues. Not much to say. It's all lies anyway. These two fought like dogs and cats. See an ad for some back issues. You can get like Star Trek fan clubs. This is before pre-internet, so you actually had to write people. There were shows where you could actually have pen pals. I remember there was a show called The Big Blue Marble, and there was a segment that would tell you how to have a pen pal. And There was some innocence to that. I hope nothing bad happened. You're usually pen pals with somebody overseas. There is a musical group called Letters to Cleo, and they are great. Kay Hanley is the singer. I love her. Um, she was a part of the soundtrack to 10 Things I Hate About You, and the band was named Letters to Cleo because at one point she had a pen pal overseas called Cleo, and that was a homage to her. And you see the Beatles have some popularity too, and the Fonz. Okay, gonna turn the page. Tony Orlando's shocking decision. Basically, he's going to retire from show business. Honestly, the public was kind of retiring him as is. I mean, he had those big hits. But nevertheless, like I said, Tony Orlando could suck the soul out of any song. Basically, what's going on, he found success very empty, spiritually. He was a guy who had success in the 50s during the blandest era of rock and roll. Eventually, he ended up being a record executive. And he was doing well there, but he got the itch to kind of perform in the 1970s. The problem is that his own label would not sign him as a singer. They said, no, we like you as in the office. So he actually had to record under a pseudonym, and that was Dawn, the group Dawn. And it was a huge success, but the thing was nobody knew who the singers were. So there were various acts pretending to be Dawn. And then finally Tony, when he saw the success of that first song, Knock Three Times, or Candina, he came out and said, yeah, I'm the guy singing that stuff. And he was able to quit his job as a record executive. He had the show, Tony Orlando and Dawn. I loved it as a kid. It's nightmarish to watch now. It is so corny. But I thought Tony Orlando was a great straight man. And the members of Dawn, one is Thelma Hopkins. I forgot the other woman's name. Very pretty woman. They had great chemistry together. You know, Tony Orlando was a great straight man, and he was always a foil for the two ladies. Going to turn the page. Also, his friend Freddie Prinze had died from self-deletion, and it was an event that kind of really hurt him because he was close friends with Freddie. One of the things they would joke about was that people would confuse them. So that's sort of how they bonded together. But in fact, they would get fan mail from each other's fans. And Freddie, unfortunately, the belief is that he didn't intend to do it. That he did have issues with depression, but he was a little performative. And unfortunately, he was performative with an extremely dangerous weapon that may have discharged. The weapon doesn't know what your intentions are. So, and unfortunately, he passed away. Freddie Prinze went to my junior high school, but 9 years before I did. Think about this. 1970, he is graduating from junior high school. Between then and 1977, he becomes one of the biggest TV stars of that era, and he's dead. So that's how quickly things can change. Okay, now to get to the article here, and it's about Grease. The movie had not come out yet, but we see the stills, and it's kind of building up. There was a big build up for this movie. I remember I loved it as a kid, saw it multiple times. The glow of it kind of faded quickly for me. I think the following year I was like, why the hell did I like this movie? The music was great. The movie itself was kind of questionable. You had really old actors playing these roles. One of the things that Mad Magazine did in its parody was pointing out how old most of the actors were. And they also pointed to the fact that Olivia Newton-John had very little screen presence, to the point where she was actually drawn invisible for a couple of those panels because she just had no screen presence whatsoever, other than being really pretty. And then we see the Danny Zuko character, who's kind of like I don't know if he's a sadder version of the Fonz. Fonz was a weird character in that he was an older guy who hung around teenagers, and he had a lot of he was like a regional boss. He had a lot of authority in the diner. He had a lot of authority in his auto shop, and in a lot of authority in the high school that he did not attend. But it was really kind of pathetic that he just kind of would bully and kind of prey upon, teenagers. Like my junior high school dean did. And I was in junior high school, and he was dating the students there. So I'm going to turn the page. Danny Zuko was sort of like a guy who pretended to be the Fonz, but wasn't. So it continues, the article about Grease, just telling you why you're going to like this film. Next, we have a profile on one of the Bay City Rollers. This is Derek Longmore. He's kind of the toothy guy in a band that was very toothy. I do remember Rollermania. I do remember watching the Saturday morning TV show. It was very odd because when the guys aren't singing, what they said was undecipherable. It sounded like an alien language, literally like they had marbles in their mouths. And that was because of those really thick Scottish accents. But again, you were there for the music. Saying that Derek, it's actually a fairly interesting article, believe it or not, saying that, there were a lot of ups and downs when the band was starting out. At one point, they were on vacation, but their manager put them on tour, which kind of screwed up their entire schedule. And they're also saying, that, Derek's kind of a nice guy. And, he kind of cares about his family. Again, he's presented as very soft, very toothy guy to date. Turn the page. Speaking of toothy and cute, we see Leif Garrett here. Leif Garrett was a guy who was manufactured into being a teen sensation for a long time, since the early 1970s. Because he had gotten one of his first shows that he had worked on was in 1970 as a kid on a TV show called Bob, Carol, Ted, and Alice. That was a successful movie that transferred to television, wasn't successful because of the subject matter. Leif did not understand the subject matter at the time. It was a sex comedy. And but nevertheless, he did make a positive impact. He also had recorded records. He had some minor hits in the mid-70s. One of the things I do remember seeing, this is, years after he had done the appearance, he was on American Bandstand. And Dick Clark actually called him out. I don't think he meant to be mean to Leif, but he was basically saying, listen, how much of this is you and how much of this is a manufactured image that, you're being presented by the record companies. And Leif was kind of thrown off by this because Dick Clark's saying, listen, he's calling him a phony. And he's like an 11-year-old kid. But Leif kind of handled it well. He said, yeah, I am being managed. And as I had mentioned, he this is the year that he was going to have his big record. They also mentioned his sister, Dawn, who was on My Three Sons. I didn't mind Dawn. I remember watching her on those reruns. You can turn the page. More about Leif. Apparently, Leif is very fan friendly. Like he will call fans, and he's letting the readers know that if you become a fan of Leif Garrett, Leif is gonna treat you right. You might get a call from him. You might get a letter from him. He cares about his fans. He when he performs, he goes all out because he really cares. So they're telling the teenage girls that this guy is safe and he is reliable. Then there's the tribute to Elvis. This is an ad for stuff related to Elvis Presley. I'm gonna turn the page. Okay, next we're looking at Scott Baio. It's Happy Days for Scott Baio, and you can see he is a good-looking guy. He's definitely underaged. I'm sure the girls liked him. I'm sure there were quite a few boys who liked him too, and there were quite a few adults who felt this way. Yeah, Scott. The Chachi character I never saw as a plus. I never saw him as a minus either. He was just kind of there for me, but he was not there for me. He was there for Michelle, not Michael. I do remember him. He did the movie Foxes, which was actually a pretty good film. A couple of years later, I think, and then he obviously became a success with the Zapped movies, which were terrible, and Charles in Charge. Of course, he was well known for being really a vocal supporter of Trump. So I'm going to turn the page. Next is Cheryl Ladd. Cheryl Ladd is the new Charlie's Angel. As I had mentioned earlier, Farrah leaving Charlie's Angels was huge news in 1977. And Charlie's Angels was one of the top TV shows that year, if not the top show. So people were wondering what's going to happen with Charlie's Angels. They have to have a replacement. And you knew the show had to hit a home run, a grand slam. And with Cheryl Ladd, they did. Cheryl, I remember the first episode she was in. It was the season premiere. Like less than a minute, I totally accepted Cheryl Ladd as an angel. And I totally forgot about Farrah. In fact, when Farrah appeared, guest starred in some of those episodes after she had formally left the show, because she was contractually bound to do that, I never watched those shows. Because I knew that Farrah didn't want to be there and she was forced to do it. And that took any enjoyment of seeing her, even as a guest star on the show. But, I always watched the regular episodes with Cheryl Ladd. One of the things I did find interesting was that whenever there was work that required being like very sexy looking or being very dirty or being kind of sweaty, that fell on Jacqueline in the first season. She was the one in the bikinis, not Kate Jackson. Farrah, not so much. And then once Cheryl joined the cast, she was the one in the bikinis. She was the one in the tight pantyhose. She was the one who was all dolled up. She was the one who was sweating. She was the one who was fighting. Because Jacqueline was like, hey, I don't have to do that shit anymore because we got little Cheryl here to do that. And the show continued on for me. I'm going to turn the page. Next article. This is a very white magazine. This is literally the only article on someone of color, person of color. Tony Orlando is Latino, but he's a very whitewashed one. No offense. This is on Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis. The two had a big hit. You Don't Have to Be a Star Baby. That was a huge hit. I remember you could not escape that song. And they previously had been in a group called the Fifth Dimension. Fifth Dimension was an extremely popular group. They were seen as kind of the black version of the Mamas and the Papas because they kind of delved into the psychedelic scene a bit more than most black artists. Outside of really them and Jimi Hendrix and a few others who dabbled into it, you really did not see black artists really involved heavily in the psychedelic scene. There actually were some Supreme songs that came out after Diana Ross left that had kind of that psychedelic feel. And they were very successful in that genre. They're very successful with their big hit. It's basically about their marriage. I think they're still married today. So these two are very dedicated to each other. Marilyn's a very beautiful woman. And what separates this article from some of the others is that it's not a crush-friendly article. These two are married. These two are kind of middle-aged. And it's emphasizing the successful partnership that these two have. The love and the money and the success. And it's kind of just telling the readers, those young readers, hey, this is what you should be inspired to in 20 or so years from now. Gonna turn the page. Okay, then the article continues on them, but then we see the tribute to Elvis. This is kind of a rundown on Elvis's life. He had passed away in 1977. I found out about it because I know my mom was crying when I came home. And it was because she had heard the news that Elvis had passed away. But anyway, there's this kind of stuff about Elvis and his career at that point. He was a great entertainer. But there's so much known about his life, positive and negative. I did see that movie Priscilla that came out a couple of years ago, and yeah, he would have been friends with Epstein. Okay, then there's a kind of a reader-friendly article here. The magazine is asking what is their readers' most embarrassing moments. And some of the readers are kind of like, these are not terribly embarrassing things. The next article is Born to Rock and Roll. Kind of just looks like a smaller gossip column on rock stars. The Silvers, they're just working on stuff. They had some popularity. Talking about Alice Cooper, and nothing interesting. Faye Dunaway, who is married to Peter Wolf, who was the singer of the Jay Giles band. They're talking about Cher and Greg Allman, how their marriage is. They're trying to reconcile their marriage, making their marriage work, which is really hard. There's an infamous photo, and it was later used as inspiration for the Lady Gaga version of A Star Is Born. During the wedding, Cher and Greg Allman, Greg was so out of it that he fell asleep and his face fell flat into a plate of spaghetti. And he had that white John Travolta type of suit on and was just covered with spaghetti sauce. Turn the page. It continues. Barry Manilow's working on another TV special, talking about Daryl Hall, I should say. And Hall & Oates is finishing up another record. They were huge at the time. Gladys Knight and the Pips, they were pretty big. They're working on a record. David Copperfield is mentioned here. He's going to have another TV special. I'm not sure why he's mentioned here, because I know he's not a singer. They're mentioning the Bay City Rollers. And Sean Cassidy is a guy he's getting so much fan mail that his handlers, his managers, actually forced him into an office to read it. Which on one hand, it kind of signals to the readers and the fans that he's a guy who's dedicated to listening to his fans, but on the other hand, it's saying, we have to force him to listen to your whining. And there's a pinup of Henry Winkler as the Fonz. And turn the page. What's next for Farrah? So they're talking about Farrah. Farrah had forced her way out of her contract with Charlie's Angels, talking about some of the moves that she's going to do. She never replicated her success, at least in terms of popularity. She had done significant work after leaving. Not movies like Cannonball Run, which she looked beautiful in, but which is a terrible film. The Burning Bed, Small Sacrifices. She was great on these TV movies, and yeah, kind of just seeing what's next for her. They're talking about Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Tanya Roberts eventually ended up with that role. Can turn the page. We're going to look at Kiss. Now, what's interesting here is that magazines like this normally shied away from hard rock. However, the genre was becoming very popular, particularly Kiss at this time. So they kind of brought it in, saying, hey, maybe some of our readers care about this because we're getting feedback that they do like this group. I remember watching the Kiss TV movie Phantom of the Park. That was dreadful. I watched 1 hour of it. I was excited about it from the moment I heard about it. I watched 1 hour of it and I turned the channel in disgust because it was so awful. And I could not believe that Kiss did that to me. I took it as a personal insult. It does have great moments of terribleness, and the band for decades didn't want to talk about it. But the thing that's interesting here is how this is written up. Kiss is a hard rock band. These are adult guys. They're not like Anson Williams. They're not writing poetry. They're not playing with puppies and stuff like that. But the article is sort of written with that tone. So the thing is, they're sort of presented here as like theatrical superheroes. So even though they're not a teen-friendly group, they're written that way. So the teenage kind of like teeny bopper cottage industry was able to co-op the hard rocking Kiss. And they kind of give a breakdown on some of the members, like Ace here. He says he likes pizza and beer. His favorite movies are James Bond movies. His favorite TV shows are Happy Days and Saturday Night Live. He always had the ambition to be a rock star. And he owns a Corvette and a Rolls Royce. Turn the page. Then we're going to go to Gene, some of his stats. His favorite movie, he likes horror and science fiction films. He's also a big comic book fan. He was born in Israel. He spent some of his youth there. So when he came to America, he didn't speak English. And one of the ways that he learned English was by reading comic books. And his costume is actually based on Black Bolt. There was an issue of the Fantastic Four, and Gene really liked that, and he took that as inspiration for his demon persona. He likes Greek food. It's understandable. He's gonna like Mediterranean food. His favorite TV shows are Star Trek and Prayer for Today. I'm not sure what that show is. His ambition was to be important. So it wasn't necessarily to be a rock star. He wanted to be important. And he chose music as his vehicle to do that. His car, and he says that he actually doesn't own one. And that he just simply rents limousines. Next, we're going to go to Paul. Paul actually grew up near my neighborhood. He had moved out years before I had moved in. But he does recall that he was Jewish, he's Jewish, and the Irish kids used to beat him up because he was Jewish. And then I remember seeing his performance in Phantom of the Park, and I'm saying, God damn it, those kids were right to hit you. So we see that his favorite food is, he likes Japanese food, he likes comedies. His favorite TV show is Saturday Night Live, and he likes old Marx Brothers. So he's probably watching WPIX a lot. And his ambition as a kid was to be a rock star and or artist. So he was kind of like a theater kid. And this definitely worked out for him. And his car, he has a Corvette and a Bentley. And we're going to go to Peter Criss. He's the cat man. And let's see, his favorite food, Italian seafood. He's half Irish, half Italian. So he's gonna have a lot of Italian stuff in his background. His favorite movies are, quote, the violent ones. At times, him, from what I understand, both Peter and Ace kind of bullied Paul and Gene. His favorite TV show is Saturday Night Live. And his ambition was the same as Stan's. He just wanted to be something artistic, music, or just acting or something like that. And his car is a limousine, so he owns the limousine. He doesn't rent them like Gene does. I guess Gene figures that he doesn't have to pay for the insurance and stuff like that. So that's what's going on. Peter had the biggest he had the biggest single success for the group with his song Beth, which is so out of place with the rest of the Kiss catalog. So, and they're talking about the Kiss Army even now. So I'm going to turn the page. We see just ads. There's one ad here for some magazines, fan magazines. Then we see there's a Kiss lookalike contest. So they're inviting readers to, present their best imitation of Kiss. And then they're going to have a contest and so forth. So you can see this is the main draw for a lot of their readers, was really the theatrics and not necessarily the music. Going to turn the page. Then there's a article on Sha Na Na. Sha Na Na was very popular. Their success started... Well, at least their quote recent success at this point started when they were at Woodstock. They had performed, and then they had their TV show, which I did watch. It was very safe. It was very 1950s. It was family friendly. I remember there was this one guy who kind of had the receding hairline, but he had all this body hair, and he insisted that his full chest be shown with basically wearing a rug on his chest. That always kind of creeped me out. And they're talking about the guy, the success of the band, saying the band actually has more gravitas than you would think, based on their TV show. I'm gonna turn the page. Next is gossip, but from the music industry. Donny Osmond is coming out with his long-awaited album. That's probably the last time anyone has said that about Donny Osmond record. He actually had a hit in the late 1980s, Soldier of Love. It was originally released without his name, because the thing is, his name was toxic, and Osmond knew it. And he even spoke to Michael Jackson. The two were friends, and about this. And Michael Jackson had just straight up said, "Listen, why don't you just simply change your name?" But Donny Osmond wasn't about to do that. And he did have that one-time success. He actually did not want to release his name because he figured that if people found out that he was singing that song, they would stop listening to it. It turned out not to be the case. It was a top 20 hit for him. And kind of his last hurrah musically. There's Cher. She's coming out with another record. Cher at this time was sort of ebbing musically. Her career was going downward at this point. And eventually it would pick up because she started getting movie roles. And she actually turned out to be a pretty good actress. The group Rose Royce, they were the ones who sung Car Wash, which is kind of like a mediocre film. Odyssey, I've never heard of them. Firefall, I've never heard of these groups. Alan O'Day, who had Undercover Angel, one of those one-hit wonders. Okay, turn the page. You've asked for it. This is more readers. Getting feedback from readers. asking about Sally Field. They're asking about Glennis O'Connor, the Eagles. There's no need to go actually read these questions. They're just fan service. Frank Zappa is getting a question. Frank Zappa was a really smart guy. Henry Winkler. A few others. Just fans asking questions about their favorite star. Lots of fan service here. Robbie Benson, David Copperfield, again Barry Manilow, Jodie Foster. Can turn the page. On the Up and Up. These are like musical acts they thought were going to be big. They didn't. This is a group called Blue. Never heard of them. Turn the page. Here's a one-page tutorial on how to do your makeup. Again, teenage girls, so they're giving you some practical advice. There's an article on Peter Frampton. As I had mentioned, Frampton had that one wonderful year. He was never able to replicate the success of Frampton Comes Alive, though. But nevertheless, he still had some juice. He was a good-looking guy. See why teenage girls would like him. Turn the page. And it continues with Peter talking about, his new movie, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, his new record deal, which he sold very little records of, and some kind of like pictures of him in concert, recalling that famous 1976 year of his. And then the magazine ends with a kind of this awkward, goofy-looking pinup of Michael Paul Glazier. And that's it for this magazine, Teenage Favorites, number 11. And I'm going to have a review of issue number 16 coming up very soon. Bye.